In order to make all of this work, there's an extra layer of hierarchy in your CDB, in your CDB dollar root, where think about it in those system views that you use. Like if I'm a user, I have user tables. It shows me my tables. Then there's all tables. Maybe that's all the tables I have access to. If I'm a privileged user, I might see even more by looking at DBA tables, which would be all the tables that a DBA could see in my database. But because we have dictionary isolation in the multi-tenant architecture, we might at times want to be able to see everything across all containers in this environment. And that's where the CDB views come in. So a level of hierarchy above the DBA level, you have things like CDB tables, which would list all the tables in your entire container database and all the pluggable databases. Now, of course, you're going to have duplication of tables across multiple databases, especially if you're, say, a SaaS provider where everyone has the same schema layout. So how do we differentiate there? We have the con ID column in all of our system tables now, and that stands for container ID. So the container ID will identify the pluggable database or CDB root in which an object resides. So for example, if you select from user objects, all objects, or DBA objects, then you're looking at what is local to that pluggable database or container. But if you do a select from CDB objects, then what you're going to see is the list of objects for the entire container. But there's some tricks to this, so we'll get to that. So this applies to all your dictionary views, and there are lots of them, hundreds of these dictionary views that have now the CDB version of the DBA views, as it were. So what happens if you go to the root, and that means you have to be a privileged user to access the root, and you look at all of the table spaces that are in your database? Well, what you're going to see there is a list of table spaces, each identified with a container ID, because every PDB has its own system, sysocs, for example. But the container ID 1 is always CDB root. Container ID 2 is your PDB seed. Now, your PDB seed is not visible in these views by default, but we'll get to that much later in the talk today. And then the container ID 4 in this case is a user pluggable database, an application PDB. So if we go now to PDB 1, where we're in the context of just that pluggable database, even as a privileged user, and we issue that query looking at table space name from DBA table spaces, what we will see is only the table spaces that apply to my pluggable database. So as a DBA, you get a lot of access and ability to monitor from the CDB root context. You can look at what's going on in every pluggable database, but the users within an individual pluggable database can't see what's going on elsewhere. So a PDB never sees information from other PDBs. And when we say never, that's true even if you're a privileged user. So if you go into the CDB root, again, you have to be a privileged user to do that, and you select count star from CDB objects. In this case, we've got something over 100,000 objects listed there. But if we then, with that same user, go inside a PDB, we see a much smaller number of objects. And here's another little hint. Some of those objects are going to be pointers to objects in the root. So even though we're looking at the same view with the same user, context really matters here. What you can do at the CDB root is different from what you can do from within a pluggable database. In fact, there are going to be some operations that are not allowed in one place or another. And that's why you see the different number of objects in the PDB versus the root.